Cantonese How Do You Say podcast. This is Eugene from LearnDialect.sg, and we have something very special for you. The next 6 episodes will be a special series where we have invited Eric Chow, a native Cantonese speaker, to share with us more on learning Cantonese. Here's a quick summary of what's upcoming so that you know what to expect from our podcast. Special Episode 1, Why You're Never Too Old to Learn Cantonese. Special Episode 2, Debunking the Top Myths of Learning Cantonese. Special Episode 3, Differences between Singapore and Hong Kong Cantonese. Special Episode 4, Say It Like You Own It Part 1, Getting to Know Someone in Cantonese. Special Episode 5, Say It Like You Own It Part 2, Asking a Date Out. And last but not least, Special Episode 6, Say It Like You Own It Part 3, Giving Compliments and This and That Questions. There's lots to cover, so let's get going now. Today, we have a very special guest, Eric. So Eric, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hello everyone, my name is Eric Chow. I was born in Hong Kong and I grew up in Hong Kong. I finished my primary school and secondary school in Hong Kong until I spent a few years overseas in Canada to further my studies. When I was in Canada, I actually had an opportunity to work in a multicultural, multi-racial radio station whereby I was one of the news broadcaster, broadcasting news in Cantonese. After graduating, I came to Singapore to work and live, and that's it. That's me.
Thank you, Eric. Can you share with us also a bit more about why you are so interested in Cantonese? Because nowadays in Singapore, not many people are focused on what we quote-unquote dialects, including Hokkien, Teochew, and Cantonese. So what kept you interested in maintaining or improving your Cantonese proficiency?
Well, for one, I have 2 children. They are both teenagers.
Right.
One thing I noticed is that when they want to speak, or rather my mother want to speak to them, they will only nod their heads. And after going home, they will tell me, we didn't understand what Mama was talking about. We had no choice but to nod our heads in order not to be seen as rude. So because of that, for the sake of old folks here, I have the responsibility as a father to teach my children to understand the dialect a bit better. Although dialects are seen to be a dying thing in Singapore, but don't forget we have a lot of old folks here who can only speak or relate in dialects. And this is one of the major factors. The other factor is that with the push of Mandarin by mainland China, you can see that even in Guangzhou, Guangdong province, the young people are not speaking in dialects anymore. So at home, at school, even with friends, they are all speaking or listening to Mandarin. Yeah, so I feel that we may be facing a possible or slight possibility of extinction of the dialect. So for me, I feel that it is important to save it as it has a few thousand years of culture or of history. And if you look back, if someone who learned Japanese, who learned Korean, you'll realize that some of the vocabularies, when you pronounce them, they actually sound like dialects. So Cantonese, it sounds like Hokkien, it sounds like Teochew. One of the reasons after much research, I found out was, in the past, Cantonese, Teochew, and Hokkien could trace their roots to the official language in the middle part of China, which was at that time, during the Tang Dynasty, was the cultural center, was the political center of China. And when Japan sent their envoys to China, they will learn all sorts of things. They will learn medicine, they will learn the language, and that's when they imported the language into Japan, introduced into Japan. So in current Japanese language and the Korean language, you can still find remnants of bits and pieces of vocabulary that retain the original form in central China, which has evolved to become a dialect in the Guangdong province.
So do you mind sharing with us some of these examples?
The first thing that came to my mind was tofu.
Tofu. Okay.
In Japanese, it is tofu.
Tofu. And how do you say tofu in Cantonese?
Tofu.
Tofu. Got it. Well, that was very interesting. So many people I've spoken to, they are actually reluctant to learn Cantonese. They cite reasons like, I'm too old to learn. So not everybody is in the same situation as yourself, where you're trying to bridge the communication gap between your kids and, let's say, your parents, right? So a lot of them just think, I'm too old to learn, or Cantonese is no longer useful, especially in Singapore's context. How would you respond to them?
Nobody is too old or too young to learn something. When, example for my kids, they grew up learning a few languages as well as Cantonese. So for them, I would say it is quite a difficult situation. But amazingly, my elder one, who's 17, at home he would speak to my mother-in-law in Mandarin, and at school, of course, Singlish. Can I say that?
Of course.
Okay. But they come back from school, spend the whole day. How many hours actually can I speak to them? Okay. When I speak to them, it can be English, Mandarin, and Cantonese. But amazingly, sometimes when we are talking, he was able to express himself, talk to me in vocabulary, using vocabulary that I wouldn't have imagined he picked up. And I asked him, how do you learn all these words or phrases? And asked me back, what do you think? So for a young kid, okay, there's no problem. I have even spoken with someone from Indonesia, Indonesian helpers. It was my immediate next door neighbor. There was one day she came to work for my neighbor, and he greeted me in Cantonese, and I was so amazed, and I asked him in Cantonese, how do you speak Cantonese? Then she replied in Cantonese and told me that she worked in Hong Kong for a couple of years. Her environment actually encouraged her or forced her to learn. And although she was speaking with heavy Indonesian accent, but I could understand every word she said. And she could also equally understand every word I say. So it proves to say that people from different cultural backgrounds, with or without the understanding of the Chinese language, or whether he or she can write or read Chinese, the person is fully capable of learning. It is whether you want to learn or you're in the right environment to learn. And for old people, I have seen my mother-in-law learning Cantonese because she speaks Mandarin and she speaks Hokkien and Teochew. I mean, she is very nice. She would also learn Cantonese so that she can understand what I'm talking to my children. Yeah. So I think if you are willing to learn, you're eager to learn, there's no restriction as far as age is concerned.
Right. So that's really insightful, because now what I'm hearing you say is that no matter your age, right, it's not an excuse. Even though you are a non-Mandarin speaker, like you mentioned earlier on, the domestic helper, right, because she was in Hong Kong for a period of time, she was put in an environment that she has to learn Cantonese. So even though she doesn't have any Mandarin background, she's able to pick it up.
She's not the only one. I came across, I went back to Hong Kong regularly, and on public transport, you could hear Filipino helpers speaking on the handphone with their employers, and they are communicating fully in Cantonese. There's no English words involved.
Right.
Yeah, so it's an environment. It is the will to survive in the kind of environment that make it successful.
Right. So there's no excuse not to learn Cantonese if you're truly interested in Cantonese, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This is one of the myths that we think about Cantonese. You're too old to learn a new language. So this gives you a taste of what's coming up in our next episode, where Eric will help us to debunk other myths when it comes to learning Cantonese.